Hi, my name is Dr. Shan from Vitality Chiropractic Centers. This video is all about mental stress and how this can turn into a physical problem in the body. This video is for two main groups of people. Number one, it's for our patients, so they can help to manage their own stress, which will help to speed up their own recovery process. And number two, this is for anybody who's not a patient, so they can understand more about really what's going on with their body and their condition. Before we start though, one of the things we need to answer is, what is stress? When most people think of stress, they think of stress being something purely mental or emotional. Of course, we'll get more into the other types later today. But when we talk about stress, really, it's not something that's external in the world. It's not that somebody says something and they are a stress, or they're causing us a stress, or someone does something that maybe hurts us and that causes a stress. The truth is that stress is completely internal. Adversity and challenge are always going to be present in our lives. How we react to them and how we adapt to them will decide whether this becomes a stress in our body. So one thing you may be wondering then, is stress always bad? Now, of course, there are different types of stress. Stress is not always going to be bad. There can be what we call constructive or destructive types of stress. One example I like to use is the example of somebody who's doing exercise. If someone goes to the gym, maybe they're running a lot, maybe they're doing weights, and over time, progressively, they're getting stronger and they're getting fitter and they're getting healthier. Even though they're putting that physical stress on their body, overall, they're getting better. However, if they get to a point where maybe they're not doing enough, or maybe they overexert themselves, that overexertion means the stress on the body is exceeding the amount that they can deal with, and instead of it going from constructive to where they can actually get better and grow from it, it becomes more destructive. And that's where it starts to have a negative effect on that person's body and on that person's health. Now, one thing you may ask then, of course, is, when is stress bad? And this, to some extent, can be a bit of a thin line. It's something that people need to determine. This is not just for physical acts. This can also be for mental and emotional as well. If you're putting a lot of hours into, say, a particular passion you have, whether it's work, whether it is a particular project, or even something you're doing maybe with your family, if you're doing this, maybe doing 60, 70, 80 hours a week, but it's something that you really value and is going to bring something better to your life, this short-term stress actually may be good to produce something better for the long term. However, if you're doing something in the short term and it's not really improving things, and you continue to do this in the long term, and it's always putting on you that mental, emotional, physical, or even chemical stress, that's where it starts to become a bad stress and becomes particularly destructive. So as I just mentioned, there are these different types of stresses. There are three main ones that we think about, not just within chiropractic, but in general within healthcare. So number one, we have the mental and the emotional, as I mentioned. Number two is the physical, and number three is the chemical. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to break all of these down, and then we're going to really go more into the mental and the emotional. So number one is the physical. Like I mentioned earlier, there can be this overexertion where the good stress of, say, something that builds us and makes us stronger goes past that point and becomes a bad stress, like somebody overdoing themselves in the gym. However, there's many other types of physical stress as well. There can be falls, there could be injuries, there could be accidents. It's not always necessarily where we've overdone ourselves in an exercise, but it can be these other physical ways as well. The second one would be chemical stress. Chemical stress is something that can be taken in by the foods we eat, the things that we drink, any chemicals such as if people are smoking, drinking, narcotics, or even some over-the-counter medication or prescription medication. These all put, again, a chemical stress on the body, and how the body reacts is what determines if it becomes a good or a bad stress. One example would be, say, for certain people who have intolerances to certain types of food, whether this may be things like nuts or even milk. Personally, I don't have any effect on milk, but I know some people where it may affect them more negatively. In this case, you wouldn't blame the particular substance or chemical, but it's about how the body is then reacting to it. And this is one of the things that over time can put a progressive stress onto the body, especially if there are things which are more likely to cause a chemical stress, not just for certain people, but for all people, such as I mentioned, things like alcohol, medications, or smoking. These are things that can have a destructive and damaging effect, especially if prolonged and used more chronically over time. But the one we're really going to go more into today is going to be the mental and the emotional stresses and how these will start to become physical within the body. I want to say this is all backed up by science. None of this is pseudoscience or all based on theory. This is actually based on over 30 years of research into this field, showing how mental stress will then start to predispose in the body as something truly physical. The reason I talk so much about stress is not just because of the effect it has on my patients, but also because of the increasing amount it's affecting us in our normal modern society. This is something that affects a lot of people, and then is going from being that mental to really starting to affect things physically, and then it becomes a spiral of starting to affect the mental even more because the physical has been damaged. Before I start today and I go through the physiology of how we actually get these stress responses, I want to explain that everything I go through is going to be based on medical research, and this is not something new, this is not pseudoscience. This is research that we've had and been developing for the past 30 years. So this is really all based on factually what is going on in the body and how this starts to lead to these problems. I'm sure at some point everyone has seen somebody and they've said, oh, the problem you have, it's due to stress. Whether it's going to see their family member, going to see the doctor, going to see their masseur. Today I really want to explain exactly how that happens. Before we start though, one thing to understand is that we are all chemical factories. We need chemicals that help us wake up, we need another one that helps us go to sleep. We need chemicals to tell us that we feel full, and another one to tell us that we feel hungry. These chemicals are always working together, usually antagonistically, so at least one opposite or more for each different feeling that we have, so that it can prepare us to do the different things that we need to be able to do in life, and so that we can react properly when things are changing. Again, part of our adaptability, as I mentioned. So one of the things that does happen is that when we start to have more of a stressful event, especially something like a danger, we react now the same way that we would have reacted thousands of years ago. In terms of our evolution, some things have not changed quite too much just yet. So us, as humans, even animals, we all react in a very, very similar way when it comes to something dangerous. So as an example, if we have a bear, not maybe this bear, maybe something a bit scarier, we have this scary kind of animal in front of us. We react now in the same way that our ancestors would have thousands of years ago. The way we react is, of course, to make sure that we can either fight or to run away from this bear in front of us. This is called the fight or flight response, and I'll explain a bit more about how that works. So the fight or flight response starts first by redirecting the blood flow in the brain. We can see this area at the top here. This is this pink area. This is the frontal cortex, and this is the part that's associated most with our intelligence and our happiness. What happens though, because again we're in front of this bear, to some extent intelligence and happiness are not quite as important. So what it's going to start to do is going to redirect the blood flow more towards this area at the hindbrain, which is that purple area at the back. What this area does is it helps really with all of our reactions. This is where we have a lot of our reaction centers. So it means we're now going to have better reactions from our eyesight, our hearing, and even our strength. When this area gets stimulated, it's now going to stimulate a small part in the middle of the brain called the hypothalamus. The hypothalamus, as you can see, this yellow area is sitting in the middle of the brain, and this is going to then start to stimulate a change of hormones in the body. This hormonal change is going to travel down, it's going to make it to the adrenal glands, which are sitting on top of your kidneys, and this is going to release what's called adrenaline. And I'm sure everybody here either has felt or understands the idea of adrenaline. Adrenaline is something that you feel when you're about to get in a fight, you're about to exercise, you're about to do something competitive, or something dangerous is about to happen. To some extent, adrenaline even happens when we see people that we're attracted to or that we're interested in. It's a chemical change in the body, but really it's preparing us for something that's usually more dangerous. When this adrenaline is released in the body, it's going to start traveling to other body parts via the blood system. And when it goes through the blood system, it's now going to reach the muscles, especially the big muscles around the legs, the glutes, and the arms and the shoulders. And when it reaches these areas, it's going to tell the blood vessels in those areas to go from being smaller to being bigger. The reason they're opening up is because as the blood is now flowing in more, it means that it can carry in more oxygen and more glucose. So essentially, by having more blood flowing into the area, you're allowing it to become stronger and to get more energy so that it can do the things it needs to, such as being stronger in this particular moment. However, now we have a problem. This blood is flowing to all of these areas that have these big muscles, such as our arms, our shoulders, and our legs, to stimulate this fight-flight response so that we can run away or that we can actually fight this danger that stands in front of us. But where is this blood coming from? So this means the blood is actually coming from some of our other vital areas in the body, which at this point the body deems to not be quite as necessary. This includes your digestive system, your immune system, from your heart, from your lungs. It's coming from all of these other different body parts, even from some of the other muscle groups which your body is deeming to not be quite as important at this particular moment. And in the short term, this makes perfect sense. If you have a bear standing in front of you, of course, you have to deal with the bear. You have to either fight or run away. That is what is most important for you and for your overall health. This is not the time to fight that cold or to digest your lunch. This is the time to deal with that immediate danger. But what if this starts happening on a chronic level? What if instead of happening occasionally, this starts to happen every day, every week, every month, for a number of months? In this case, it's going to start to really have a detrimental effect on the body. I mentioned how this reaction to stress is not just something that we have, it's also something that animals exhibit as well. They hear something, say as an example, a deer is in the woods and it hears this same bear. It hears some twigs being broken, its ears perk up, it gets very rigid and it gets ready to probably run away. The difference between us and the deer though, is that the deer after this, as soon as it knows that there's no danger and everything's safe, relaxes and it goes back to grazing. But humans don't necessarily do that. Sometimes we will, of course, but a lot of the time we will then produce that stressful reaction within the body to some adversity in the world. Or potentially, we can even produce this from memory when there's actually no real challenge or adversity around us. There's no danger, but we're still producing that response in the body like there is. An example a colleague of mine told me a long time ago is that you cannot build something and destroy something at the same time. And to some extent, that's what's happening within the body. Because as I mentioned, it starts to affect all these different systems of the body, such as the immune system, affecting the nerve system, affecting the digestive system. But it doesn't just affect those systems, it also starts to affect the brain itself. I mentioned before about this front area of the brain, this prefrontal cortex, and it's associated with our happiness and with our intelligence. What this essentially means then is when we're in a stressed state, we're not going to be as happy and we're not going to make as smart decisions. And if this is something that's happening on a chronic basis, then this is something that's going to be having more of an effect of our health and our mental health over time as well. There will be this understimulation of these important parts of the brain. So when you have chronic stress, there's going to be this impairment and reduction in certain parts of the body, such as your immune response, your digestion, the nerve system, your spinal alignment, how you grow, your reproduction, and of course affecting your cognitive abilities and your happiness as well. One thing you may notice there is we've talked about the spinal alignment. I mentioned how these big muscle groups are now getting more of the blood. It's because part of it is coming away from those small muscles, such as the ones which are controlling the alignment of the spine and the neck as well. So it can start to have a negative effect and even cause the things that people come to see chiropractors for. One of the other main ways that it can start to cause a problem in the body is really when the nerve system is affected. The nerve system is the wiring system of your whole body, connecting everything so that everything can work and communicate well between the body and the brain. However, if there is a breakdown in this communication or an injury, especially due to stress, then it can start to have a detrimental effect on all those other systems which it's connecting. So now you may be thinking, what do I do? There's stress all around me. It's not possible to avoid all stresses. Of course we can't, unless we decide we're going to give up our phones, go live in the woods and eat berries all day. There will always be stresses. But it's about finding out how we can have that balance, like I mentioned earlier, between constructive and destructive stress. It's the difference between doing something to improve our career or ruining our health because of our career. It's finding that balance for all of us. So now you may be wondering what this has to do with chiropractic. Put very simply, it can either help to speed up the process of our active patients, or for some others it can help them to understand part of how this problem has been predisposed to them. As I mentioned before, spinal alignment and nerves can be affected by our mental stress. And again, it's something that's been shown in the medical literature. So if there is this kind of problem going on, by managing the mental stress, it may not necessarily fix things straight away, but it means that any results that you get from a practitioner are going to be much faster and they're going to be maintained much longer over time. So as part of this video today, I won't be giving you any ways to relieve stress. Instead, it's going to be talking about some questions that you can go through with yourself to determine how you can mitigate and deal with this stress better for the future. The reason I don't go through any ways to relieve stress is because, to be frank, we all know lots and lots of ways to deal with our stress. everyone's stress response and everyone's stress relief is different. The way that you react to stress is probably different to myself, and we all know countless different ways that work for us. For some people it will be exercise, some people it could be yoga, some people it could be meditation, some people it may be food, Netflix, reading, talking with friends, and countless other options. So I would say, instead of trying to give you relief, I would rather help instead to give you some actual tools to prevent this going forward and to understand more of the stress itself. Unfortunately, it's very common that when people have stress, instead of trying to then understand it so that they can learn from it and improve from it, even again trying to take that destructive stress and turn it into something constructive for the future, it's very common instead that we do something else in between to numb ourselves. It's kind of like, say, somebody who has migraines and they've had them for years. They keep taking a Panadol. The Panadol has never fixed it. No one's ever had a shortage of Panadol in their blood. But it's a way that acts as a short-term relief. And it can be the same, unfortunately, sometimes for these other techniques. I'm not saying they shouldn't be used. What I think would be best instead is try to understand and really try to evaluate that stress first, even doing it actively, even though it's difficult, and then trying to do some of the stress release afterwards that you already know best for your particular situation. So instead of ignoring that stress and just going straight for stress relief, I have some questions here and some tasks that I think would be very useful for you to do. What I would recommend is having a journal. Again, it can just even be a few scraps of paper. But anytime you do feel this stressful event, anything where it starts to build up in the body and it is concerning you and you're not feeling good or happy about it, what I would recommend is taking these 4 steps. So number 1 would be identifying the stress. And what I mean by this is really looking at the thing that, even though we talked about stress being an internal issue, but really identifying the thing, the adversity, which you believe is causing you the stress. Number 2, why is this making you feel a certain way? So then looking at what we feel has triggered us and then trying to understand why it has happened. Number 3, asking yourself the very simple question of, can you change this event? If this is something on a big scale, then this is something that maybe you can't change. And even though it may be difficult, it may not be as useful to be as stressed about this until it is something that you can actively change. And number 4, is this stress helping you? Again, this is where we talk about the difference between constructive and destructive stress. If you're working very hard at night, but you're doing it because you love your children, you want them to have a good life in the future, then maybe that's a constructive stress, not just for you, but for your whole family. So to make this easier to use, before we finish the video today, here's an example that you can try to adapt for your own situations. So number 1, identifying this stress. So we have this imaginary person, they're at work and their boss has come in and they've yelled at them. So number 2, this person will ask themselves, why are they getting stressed? Is it because their boss is shouting at them? Is it because maybe their boss is saying something that they missed to do and it is their fault? Or is it because they feel hurt and threatened because their boss is saying things which aren't fair at all? Number 3, the question is, can you change this event? If you can change this, whether it means trying to talk to them more logically, maybe trying to talk to another coworker, or even talking to somebody in HR in this example, that would be a next logical step instead of maybe going into the spiral of feeling bad and feeling stressed. And finally, number 4 is to ask yourself, is this stress helping you? As difficult as it can be, sometimes it can be best to try and do our best to find a way to let things go. If it's something that we cannot change and we cannot affect in the future, finding that way, even though it can be difficult, can be the best for us. I hope this video has been helpful. And if you have any more questions, either about mental stress, the effects it has on your physiology, or any physical ailments it may be affecting for you or for your loved ones, you can give us a call on 8438-9550, or you can email help@vitalitychiropracticcenters.com and we'll be happy to help.